Senator Josh Hawley's anti-loot box, anti-pay-to-win bill is now available to read. It's a bill that paints with a fairly broad brush. It would fundamentally shake up the industry. However, many are calling his motives into question, as well as the motives of those who have co-signed the bill, including notable video game violence alarmist Senator Richard Blumenthal. While we may have paid attention to this story because we don't like loot boxes and pay to win, it's clear that there is a hell of a lot more to talk about. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. This is a fairly big one. Yes, we're getting slightly political. Today we are covering stuff that is relating to the US Senate. There's been a fairly significant update to the loot box law story, with it now receiving bipartisan support, but I would not cheer just yet, and it's very important that I state a few things before we really get into the meat of this video. While we gamers care about this through the lens of us seeing what bad monetization has done to our hobby, we also need to recognize that this is happening within the political sphere. That changes things. Now, I happen to love politics, so this is quite kind of natural to me to cover. It's pretty fun to cover, but part of the reason why I'm covering it is because, yes, I'm dissatisfied with much of the, sort of enthusiast coverage out there of this. A lot of it is surface level. A lot of it is quite unaware of the broader political context. I think a lot of it is just leaving out really important stuff that you guys should know. And that's why I'm covering this. Indeed, some of the people involved in this bill have made movements against violent video games in the past. So yeah, we might not like loot boxes, but some of the people involved also are being alarmists about violent video games. So when dealing with a situation like this, you've got to keep this in mind. Be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. That is a phrase that alludes to the unintended consequences of blindly following a goal. In this case, supporting some of these guys on their anti-loot box stance for, protecting the kids could very well be paving the way to video game violence hysteria, especially with Richard Blumenthal, or, further overbearing industry regulation that could start to impact the content of your games in a not so good way. More on that when we talk about the co-sponsors of this bill. There's a lot to cover here, so first, the bill is available to read. Second, it has received bipartisan support. And third, Senator Hawley has been interviewed by Kotaku's Jason Schreier. Now, the background here is really quite simple. Josh Hawley is a new Republican senator for Missouri. He had a successful attorney general run in 2017, and he served in that role for 2 years. That said, he announced the exploratory committee for his senatorial campaign in August of 2017 and announced his candidacy in the following October. He drew fairly heavy criticism for doing this so quickly. A lot of people saw it as him being another ladder-climbing politician. Now, at the age of 39, he practically is a toddler as far as the average age of the US Senate goes. He recently then announced that he would introduce legislation that is aiming to clamp down on child-targeted predatory game monetization. This involves loot boxes in all forms, as well as pay to win, with his outline defining that both in terms of advantages over other players, but also just in progression accelerated by monetization. While targeted at minors, it also said it would be covering games knowingly played by minors, so being real, that would cover just about everything. Now, this was met with praise by many because of the unpopularity of many of the modern video game monetization practices. Of course, practices that I really dislike. It was also met with a lot of skepticism and some worry, with many seeing this as a PR stunt from Hawley, which again is something that ties into the accusations that he has dealt with of being a bit of a ladder-climbing politician, with there then also being concerns over regulatory powers over game design going over to the government, who of course, probably don't really get games. So that's kind of the basis here. What next? Well, Hawley was interviewed by Kotaku's Jason Schreier. Now, Hawley told Schreier that Hawley is not a gamer. He said that the law does not stem from his personal experience with games. Instead, he said that it's from him being a parent who happens to know loads of parents. He said that his kids don't go near loot boxes because their ages 6 and 4, but that he's heard a lot from other parents who are frustrated over credit card charges that stem from games. Though he did also say that he has heard from gamers who think the monetization has ruined the integrity of games. So he is at least trying to say that he understands what the gaming audience kind of thinks here. Now, Holly said that they've talked with the ESA and games companies, and then his policy advisor hopped on the call with Schreier to say that there have been differences of opinion between Holly and the industry, and then Holly hopped in to say that's being very diplomatic, which is kind of funny. He went on to confirm that FIFA would be covered by his legislation, of course with FIFA Ultimate Team and all that stuff, and that EA have expressed their concern to him, with Holly seeing that as an indication that they actually are getting somewhere. He went on to reject criticisms of this being a publicity stunt, and that if lobbyists are worried, then really, in his view, the bill is doing well, and that he sees the industry squirming about it as really him thinking that the industry is squirming because they know they won't really stand up to public scrutiny, and that they're worried about the backlash. Certainly, backlash is something the industry will get here. He then said that while Congress might not massively care about video games, they can be rallied behind the health and safety of kids, whether it's social media or games. Schreier called him on personal responsibility traditionally being at the core of his party, to which Holly said that while that is the case, they still don't have children going into casinos, and then when further pressured on pay to win, he said the pay to win, in his view, is sort of similar enough. I mean, it isn't really, but I think his point was more that it's potent psychological manipulation in the direction of kids, and I think that is something where I would agree. Schreier then asked him what his response is to companies who say that they'll crash without those types of monetization, and Holly quite simply said, they're resourceful. I think they can design games that don't rely on gambling directed at children in the center of the game. And you know what? That's fair. Look at gacha games. Look at Mario Kart Tour, a game that seems to be fundamentally designed around a gacha game loot box mechanic. Schreier then had the opportunity for a final question, which he devoted to Holly's tie to Peter Thiel. I think Peter Thiel was a contributor, and how Peter Thiel pretty much orchestrated the downfall of Gawker Media through his mortal avatar, Hulk Hogan. Holly laughed, and that was the end of the call. And I get why Jason would feel personally about that Gawker situation, but it seemed pretty unprofessional, especially because Schreier could have pressed Holly further on the law. He could have done a little bit more. He could have continued his job, but instead he just seemed to do a bit of a personal lashing out about Peter Thiel and the Gawker situation, which is, at this stage, old news. So, of course, we don't have time to recap the Gawker, Thiel, Hulk Hogan thing. So let's move on to the law being co-signed. So it's been co-signed by two Democrats. Ed Markey is a 72-year-old Democrat from Massachusetts, and Richard Blumenthal is a 73-year-old Democrat from Connecticut. I know that mentioning their names there is a little bit odd, and I definitely don't want to be ageist or anything like that. I just think it's important that viewers know that, you know, you're not really dealing with your fellow gamers here who happen to have political power. You are dealing with, I'd say it's fair enough to say Holly's a little bit of a ladder climber trying to, get his way up there, and, just some guys from a very different generation. So it's not really our people. Now, what's more important, though, is to look into the record of Blumenthal. So Blumenthal, like Holly, was his state's attorney general. During Blumenthal's 2010 Senate run, he campaigned against big tech. That included him backing a California law that would have banned the sale of violent video games to minors. Now, this is a law that would be ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, as it would have been an unconstitutional breach of the First Amendment and, creative expression. So there's a lot more to that case, but basically what's more relevant here is Blumenthal's support of it. So here's the quote. The law prohibits children under 18 from buying the most violent video games, including those where players decapitate people with shovels, beat police to death while they beg for mercy, and slaughter nude female zombies. Apparently the nude male zombies are fine by Blumenthal. Very interesting. His statement overall, though, was just very, very uninformed, saying, I am calling on the video game industry to follow the leadership of the motion picture industry, which sensibly stops unattended children from viewing violent or graphic movies. But the thing is, actually, the game and movie rating systems, from what I understand, pretty much work in the same manner, being advisory, just that the game's ratings are actually a little bit more watertight, that retailers are pretty good at enforcing them, and that game services have parental controls that are pretty damn good if parents actually use them. So Blumenthal was willfully, incorrect. Then later on, after the Newtown shooting, he called for, quote, addressing the culture of violence that may be spawned by video games. So in short, Richard Blumenthal is no friend to gamers. Indeed, Maggie Hassan, who was involved in the US loot box situation before this one, she has not co-signed this bill, which is fairly interesting. The core point is really this, though. You're not dealing with three people who care about your video games as a medium. it doesn't ring true to me like, say, the Belgium situation. So I am actually a little bit suspicious here. But anyway, let's move on to the law itself. So first up, here is how pay to win is defined by the law. With respect to an interactive digital entertainment product that, from the perspective of a reasonable user of that product, is a game offering a scoring system, a set of goals to achieve, a set of rewards, or a sense of interactive progression through the product's content, including but not limited to narrative progression. So as you can see, that is extremely broad, and that's kind of like what the law would cover. And basically here is what is not going to be allowed should this law actually, make it in. Anything that involves easing progression, easing completion of an achievement, or receiving a reward, if that progression, achievement, or reward is otherwise available in the base game, that's not allowed. So as an example, take a level boost in World of Warcraft. Technically, that would get you levels, so that's progression. It would earn you an achievement as well. You're like, congratulations, level 110 achievement. That would be illegal. The same goes for tier skips with games that have battle passes, as the tier skip would cover the non-premium pass stuff as well. Really, just about anything that involves speeding up progression would not be allowed, including an experience boost. Then moving on, it would also outlaw a user getting access to content that has been rendered inaccessible by a timer or a system that limits gameplay attempts. So basically, those energy bars in mobile free-to-play games where it's like, you can only play this game so many times and you need to wait for energy to recharge. Those things would not be allowed under this bill. And then it also would cover just anything that gives you competitive advantage. Now, to be real with you, right, assuming no other changes, would games be better without those things? Yes, absolutely. I think it's hard to argue. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, would that have been a better game if it was well-balanced and not grindy by default? Yes, it would be, instead of it launching being grindy, but with a boost on the store. Now, moving on, this bill would also outlaw loot boxes, and it is a law that would apply to games where the publisher has, quote, constructive knowledge that any users under 18 would be playing it. Now, that is incredibly broad, and that would mean that it would basically impact potentially anything, depending on the read of the law. Call of Duty, knowingly played by kids. GTA Online, knowingly played by kids. And that's really the point here. It's not just banning actual children's games from doing these things, it is essentially covering all games. Now, the ESA and many other industry bodies, including the UK's UKI, they have came out against this, saying the legislation is full of inaccuracies, that it does not reflect what the industry does, saying that it would harm player experience and put jobs at risk, and that they encourage the bill's co-sponsors to work with them on raising awareness for parental controls. Now, that last bit, that is actually important to mention. Many games do have robust parental controls. Many platforms do, like Steam, like Battle.net. On mobile, there are device-level parental controls for managing in-app purchase spending. Take Blizzard. They have parental controls that block in-game spending in PC, with Hearthstone and mobile being something you need to set up on your device, be it Apple or Google. Both companies, of course, offer controls for their operating systems. Ultimately, the parental controls, they do exist. They will prevent unwanted purchases from children, but it's also the case that the games are designed to fight against their own parental controls. Not overtly, but when a mobile game is wholly designed to drive you to purchase gems, well, that is going to include setting kids against their parents, because the kids will want the gems, even if the parents have set up their parental controls. Now, politically, that is a very relevant point. Even if the parent never gets that credit card charge, well, parents who do set up those controls, they're going to be pestered by their kids all the time to buy gems and skins and Fortnite and all that stuff. Now, for them, Senator Hawley's bill is going to resonate. They are the voters who he is targeting with this bill. Just that he's also, of course, happy to accept the support of gamers who don't happen to love loot boxes, but being real, the younger types don't tend to turn out to vote nearly as much as those who are around Hawley's age. It does seem like a bit of a soccer mum bill in many ways. Now, what's the way forward here? Well, I think it's a bit of a challenge. I hate loot boxes. I absolutely hate loot boxes. I hate the psychological manipulation that is going on in so much of freemium mobile and beginning to bleed its way into premium AAA. And when you look at the things that Hawley's talking about in this bill, if they were all deleted from games, I think the games would probably be better. And by this stage, I'm pretty much convinced that a lot of these mobile apps and even things like Twitter are basically a developmental risk to kids. I mean, they sure as hell jam up adults. What the hell are they going to do to a developing brain? Obviously, there needs to be research done there. It's just a suspicion. Yet then I'm also philosophically pretty anti-regulation. I'm pretty pro-individual responsibility. Yet, as always, like for somebody in a position like mine thinking those things, it's where you draw the line between your philosophical positions and then what's actually pragmatic and effective and will produce good outcomes in the real world. And I think really that's the thing that's challenging. Ideally, in my head, the market would self-regulate. So many of us dislike loot boxes that I would think, well, surely loot boxes will not be super successful. And maybe with Battlefront 2 stepping back, we actually have made some progress there. But it, I think, also could be the case that some of these psychological tricks are so potent and the mobile audience is so large that it doesn't actually matter what the core gamers think. We might actually just be rendered irrelevant by the Chinese market growing and mobile growing, which obviously for us is a pretty darn uncomfortable, sad position to be in that's not particularly great for our games. Yeah, then I look at the legislative side of things, right, with this bill, and I see people like Blumenthal, and I'm thinking to myself, well, Richard Blumenthal, if he was to get this law across, who's to say he's not going to, make motions against violent video games as he has done in the past? Who's to say that Blumenthal will not see the World Health Organization's categorization of gaming disorder and use that as further regulatory ammunition against the gaming industry? So I think that's really my core point here. We all have strong opinions on just about everything involved here, but it's not a simple issue. I think that if we just kind of go, loot box is bad, this guy, he does not like loot boxes, therefore he is our guy. If we do that blindly without taking the rest of the political context surrounding him and the people who have allied with him on this bill, then I think we really kind of would blind ourselves. And sure, we might get a little bit of positive progression, right? Maybe a little bit less in the way of loot boxes because this law could do well. I actually really suspect it won't do that well because of just the power of lobbying. But anyway, we could do all that and then realize, oh crap, these people are now, after they've, for the guise of saving the kids, they've taken away loot boxes. Next, they're going to do it for violence. And I mean, many of the people, like myself included, who don't like loot boxes and stuff like that, we also look at the content regulation of games in China, where you can't have bodies, you can't have gore. I believe they recently made it so they used to do this thing, right, where they turn the blood green, and that would be okay. I'm pretty sure they removed that as well. Like in Chinese PUBG, when a character is killed, they basically, they get down on their knees and they kind of wave you goodbye, turn into a loot box and disappear. We don't want that in our games. We don't want things like with what Rainbow Six Siege tried to do to appease China, and I would worry that the likes of Blumenthal would try to bring in similar types of regulations under the guise of saving the kids and with similarly broad political or, legal language where, it applies to an 18 rated game as well. So, man, it's so hard to work our way through things like this. I really want to know what you have to think about this, especially if you've made it this far. I'm pretty sure the comments of this video might be a little bit of a mess because it is, it's decently controversial in a few different areas, I suppose. So please let me know what you think. That's really it, though. I'm on the verge of rambling, so I'll just leave it now. Tell me what you think down below. I'm super keen to hear. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.